Good morning. Welcome to our General Assembly. Will you stand and join me for the flag salute? Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. My name is Britt Huff. I'm the chair of the South Bay City's Council of Government this year and also City Council of Rolling Hills Estates. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our 20th General Assembly this year. And we are delighted that you're able to join us for this special annual event, which is shared by all of our 16 cities in the South Bay and made possible by our wonderful sponsors. Let's give a big hand for our sponsors. We're going to have their names listed up here. And we also hope you had a chance to explore the exhibit hall next door here, and that we appreciate all of you who have exhibits and all of the companies that have participated this morning. So each year, the General Assembly focuses on the role of the South Bay cities in relation to a specific issue. And as usual, the topic is always too big to cover in the time that we have, but we hope we make a little indent into it. So our program is planned to just whet your appetite with some experts in the field and helping cities address change. We have posters up that illustrate the many topics that we've had for our General Assemblies over the past 20 years as we celebrate this 20th anniversary. So please take the opportunity to look at them. They're at various stations and locations throughout the venue. And we strive to make these programs pertinent to the South Bay, and we take on important topics that are not necessarily being discussed in other forums. Because we wanted to provide as much information as possible, there will not be any defined breaks, but feel free to take a break when you need to. Just try not to disturb the speakers and the audience. You'll also find at this event it's being videotaped by the City of Lawndale. And this is their video team up here as we speak. So we want to thank them very much for being here, and thank you to former Mayor Jim Osborne for arranging that for us. And so we plan to post some of these videos that are being filmed today. We'll be posting them on our website in the near future. Before we get to the main program, it gives me great pleasure, I hope, is the mayor still here? Mayor here? Okay, all right, then I'm not having the pleasure right now, but hopefully soon to come. So our next special treat will be a welcome from some of our legislators. And I think if that video is ready, we will see a greeting from State Senator Ben Allen.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Allen, and I'm very proud to represent the South Bay, the coastal South Bay, in the California State Senate. Welcome to my office here in Sacramento, here in the state capitol. I've got my son Ezra here, and we're doing the state's business today. So I'm so sorry we can't be there in person, but we're up in Sacramento actually on the morning of the South Bay COG Assembly. I know this is the 20th General Assembly, and you're going to be looking at the history of the South Bay economy from World War II onwards, and looking at where we go in the future. Looking at energy, looking at housing, looking at environmental issues, looking at transportation, a lot of those infrastructural issues that we work so closely together with our South Bay cities in our state Senate office. I want to just continue to reiterate how important this collaboration continues to be Please continue to reach out to my office. We will do the same with all the city governments that we represent so that we can be true partners in helping to improve quality of life for the folks who live in the beautiful South Bay. And so I just want to wish you a very, very happy and productive General Assembly. I know Ezra is very excited about the work that it remains ahead. And let's continue to work closely together to make life better for all of our constituents.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Our legislators are having a hard time this year coming. We usually have this on Friday, and they fly on Thursday night. So we're doing the video greeting. So a few logistics before we start. First, please note the location of the exits, and try not to stampede if you need them. So at least you know where they are. I'd also like to tell you about the materials in your packet that you got at the registration desk. You'll be very happy to know the folder is made of 100% recycled paper. Okay, thank you very much. So your packet, if you have it in front of you there, has two sides. On the left, you'll find the information about the COG, including our year in review, a fact sheet about the COG and its programs, as well as another fact sheet about our South Bay Environmental Services Center. And there's also a copy of our last quarterly newsletter. On the right side is our agenda for today's program, bios of our speakers, a description of the exhibits, and information about our sponsors who have literally made this day possible. So introductions of our speakers will be short because you have a pretty full bio there in your folder of each of them. And please note that they're in alphabetical order, so we're not showing any preference, even though Jackie is first. Isn't that lucky that she's the bee? And we ask that you refer to them for a more complete introduction. And finally, on the right side of your folder, you'll also find an important evaluation sheet. And we hope that you will take the time to fill that out at the end of the program, because it's very helpful for us to get your input as we plan future events. So thank you for taking the time to do that. You can hand that to one of the staff around the room or leave it at the front registration desk when you leave. So now turn your attention to the screen and you'll see our social media, or shortly you will, our social media information. Our hashtags for Twitter and Facebook are up there, going to be any moment now. We hope you'll take selfies, photos, tweet, and post activities and your impressions, if they're good ones, on the day on the Facebook and Twitter. And tell everyone here that you're here and you're having a fabulous time. This year we have a booth, this is so exciting, in the lobby for you to take your photo to commemorate that you were here for the 20th anniversary. And that's out front, and you take your own selfie with various signs that are provided. And are we going to have that? Oh, the slide has, okay, down. Can you read that? It's 20 THGA 2019. That's the hashtag. We also want to thank the Water Replenishment District for providing the bags that hold the items you received at registration. In the bag is also a thank you gift from the COG. And for your information and future use, we plan to have today's presentations and related materials available on our website sometime next week. Also, another important thing, our exhibits will be open till 1 o'clock, so if you have a chance to pop in there off and on during breaks, that would be great. And we'll also be doing a raffle again. A few prizes will be given out at the end of lunch, and the remainder of the prizes will be given out at the end of the day. And for all of these, you will need to be present or have someone impersonate you. The South Bay COG staff will be coming around to each table to hand out these raffle tickets at lunchtime. So be sure to keep an eye on your ticket. Remember, you must be present to win. Our raffle prizes at the end of the lunch will be Starbucks gift cards and reusable cups. At the end of the day, our raffle prizes will be 4 $25 American Express gift cards, 1 American Express gift card valued at $100, and once again, a one-night stay, and this is the one that comes at the end of the event, if you're still here, an ocean view room with a round of golf for 2 at Terranea, which is really wonderful. So make sure to stay and do that. I see our favorite mayor for the day. Mayor Robles is here from the city of Carson. Would you come up and give us a little greeting? Let's hear it for Mayor Robles.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the great city of Carson. Yay. We're always honored to have the South Bay COG here in Carson, and we look forward to seeing all of you in the organization here each and every year. It's an opportunity for old friends to visit Carson, an opportunity to also for us to showcase Carson to some new visitors. So to the extent that some of you are not completely aware of all the great activities going on in Carson, all the development, last night at the Contract Cities, met at the Porsche Experience, and I know some of you were there last night, but if you haven't been to the Porsche Experience, and I was surprised at how many people from Contract Cities had not previously been to the Porsche Experience. If you haven't been there, you need to go. You're missing a phenomenal experience. I refer to it as Disneyland for adults. It's literally that much fun. It's exciting, and they have a great restaurant, and you don't have to like cars to have a good time there. So please visit it. And with that, again, welcome. Wish you a fantastic program. And thank you very much, Madam Chair, for referring to me as a favorite mayor, even if it's just for the day.
Well, we're off to a good start. The mayor is here. Okay, so I'd also like to introduce some other special people that we have here today. We're just so pleased that so many representatives of our 16 South Bay cities are here. And I want to introduce first our city officials, and this will be in alphabetical order. And so we are starting, of course, just happens, Carson's alphabetically appropriate, Jim Deere from the city of Carson. Welcome. So from the city of El Segundo, we have Drew Boyles, Carol Bursick, Don Brand, and Chris Pimentel. Sorry about that. Did you all stand? Good. Okay, then we have from Hawthorne, Mike Toledo. Where's Mike? There he is. And we have Olivia Valentine, and Olivia is one of our vice presidents of our COG. And then we also have Alex Monteiro. And from the city of Hermosa Beach, we have Mary Campbell. And Hanny Vangari. And from the city of Inglewood, Ralph Franklin. There's Frank, Ralph. And from Lawndale, we have Robert Pullman Miles and Jim Osborne. And from Lomita, we have Mark Warnick. We like to call him Mayor Mark Warnick because his philosophy is once a mayor, always a mayor. I love that, don't you? Okay, and then from the city of Manhattan Beach, we have David Lesser. David. And from the city of Palos Verdes Estates, we have, I think, Jennifer King. Looks like it. Is she here? Thank you. And let's see, from Redondo Beach, we have Christian Horvath. And thank you to Christian. He's also one of our vice presidents of the COG. And from my city of Rolling Hills Estates, do we have Judy Mitchell here? Judy? Judy is the mayor of our city and a former chair of the COG, so thank you for being here. And I think Steve Zuckerman will be here maybe a little bit later. And let's see, from Gardena, we have the mayor, Tasho Serda. There she is. And also from Lawndale, Bernadette Suarez. Good, okay. And then we have I only have about 20 more pages here, so. Then from Torrance, we have Pat Dury, Mayor Pat Dury. And wow, we have a full house from Torrance. Thank you for coming. We have George Chen, Mike Griffith, Milton Herring, and Jeff Rizzo. Thank you. And from the Library District, Palos Verdes Library District, we have Kay Cooperman and Debbie Stigura. And from the Water Replenishment District, we have Robert Catherman. And also from the Water District, Harold Williams. Thank you. Heavens, okay, we're moving on to city managers. We have from the city of Redondo Beach, Joe Holmgren, city manager. And from the city of Torrance, Leroy Jackson. Where's Leroy? Okay, we're all just reading about how you are the longest serving city manager in the world. Congratulations. And city of Gardena, Ed Madrano. Palos Verdes Estates, Tony Dollenbrook. And from El Segundo, Greg Carpenter. And from my city, Rolling Hills Estates, we have Greg Grammer. Okay, and now these are people who were former COG chairs. And so I will read their names, and if you would stand, we will give you applause. We have Ken Blackwood from the city of Lomita, Ralph Franklin from the city of Inglewood, Jim Goodhart from Palos Verdes Estates, Judy Mitchell from Rolling Hills Estates, and Jim Osborne from city of Lawndale, and Ellen Perkins from city of Palos Verdes Estates. So welcome all of you. And we also have from Palos Verdes Estates, Councilman Kenneth Cowell. Thank you. Thank you. And we have our Beach Cities Health District. Yes, we have Jane Deal and Noel Chun. And then we are so pleased to have representatives from our legislators from Congressman Ted Lieu. We have Aurelia Friedman and Jake Rideout, and they may be next door at their booth. Let's see, we also have Natal Patel from Senator Bradford, Stephen Bradford, sorry. And then Councilman Robert Pullen Miles also represents Autumn Burke. You get to stand twice. Andrew DeBlock represents Al Mersucci. Oh, I'm sorry. And Jake Rideout is Al Mersucci. Sorry about that. And Giovanni Zuniga, Assembly. Is this? Are they here? Okay. Sorry. Just never mind. Okay, so if there's anyone whose name has not been called, now you get to stand. Thank you, thank you all to all of our representatives. And so now I would like to recognize our sponsors for this event, and we are having their, we have Southern California Edison. We especially thank you for being our benefactor level, and greatly appreciate your support. In addition to being listed in your packet, our sponsors who are up there will also be recognized in the signs on the tables, and their names will be on the screens throughout the day. So please join me in thanking all of our sponsors. So now we're going to welcome our panel members for our first segment to come up to the podium. And while they're doing so, we're going to see a brief greeting from Assemblyman Al Mersucci.
Good morning, South Bay COG. I'm Assemblymember Al Mersucci, and I want to welcome everyone to your General Assembly. Sorry I can't be there myself, but I look forward to working with everyone in the South Bay as we continue to fight for our communities and make sure that we protect the quality of life that we all enjoy living in the South Bay. I know that this is an exciting new time in our state capital with a new governor and some bold new plans, but I look forward to continuing to work with the South Bay COG on important issues like making sure that we continue to fast track the extension of the Metro Green Line to Redondo Beach and to Torrance. I'm also working with South Bay COG and with Jackie Bacharach and other folks throughout the district on laying the foundation for the jobs of the 21st century by working on expanding a 5G infrastructure network. And last but not least, I know that everyone is concerned about housing and the housing crisis and the related homelessness crisis. And these are very important issues that we're going to be addressing in our state capital. I know that we need to make sure to balance that with protecting and promoting local control. But I look forward to working with everyone as we go forward in this exciting new year. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Assemblyman Al Mersucci. So we are pleased to start off our day's events with a panel of local historians who are great resources in the South Bay for where we've been in the past and where we're going in the future. So I should just point out there are two standing mics in the room for the audience questions, and if there's time at the end, of the speakers' presentations, we'll take some questions at that time. So leading our group as moderator is Lawndale Councilman and former chair of the COG, Jim Osborne, who's a historian himself and often regales us with pictures and memories from his research, a sample of which you see or will see scrolling in the background. So, and then Rosemary will be the timekeeper, and we ask that you will, she's waving her hand there, that you kind of look at her and be mindful of the time. So, Jim, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panelists.
Thank you, Britt. Is that working? Can you hear me? Well, everybody knows everybody now. That's a long introduction. On the panel here today is a man who really needs no introduction. He was introduced a short time ago. Leroy Jackson, City Manager of Torrance. And another longtime friend, Jan Dennis, former mayor of Manhattan Beach. And Monique Leahey from Palos Verdes Library. And Tony Chong, who's an aviation enthusiast, expert, and historian in his own right. And another person I've known for many years, Greg Williams, who's the Director of Archives at Dominguez Hills. Thank you. And what the plan was, we're just going to have a roundtable discussion on issues and how they relate to the past and vice versa. And I was just going to go in sort of sequence across the panel here and defer to my former boss, Leroy. And I have to share quickly, when I was first hired by the city almost 30 years ago, or more, I guess, Leroy likes to meet all the new employees. And we sat down in a conference room, just one-on-one, and he began to tell me some Torrance historical tales, which, of course, I appreciated. And I didn't interject. I just let him go because I thought, well, maybe see if he gets this right, you know. But he did, and he really is a wealth of information. And so I wanted to begin on a regional topic that the COG's been very involved with. You've probably all seen it in the newspapers. The Daily Breeze television news has covered the coyote issue in the area, and in Torrance in particular. I was talking to Leroy earlier today, and I was telling him there was a time when I was a kid, you know, my family came here in 1902, and I recall my grandmother telling tales of how the farmlands used to be and open countryside everywhere. And she said that there was packs of coyotes around, and they would travel from the Palos Verdes Hills and raid all the ranches between there and the Baldwin Hills. And they had a regular routine. Some of the local ranchers would try to shoot them or trap them or whatever. But I always thought, that's amazing to think back that there was, you know, that much wildlife around here and other animals, of course. But now we've kind of come full circle. So who would have thought, you know, whenever it started about a dozen years ago or more, they're back. Now, Torrance has sort of led the charge on issues, and so Leroy, would you please explain some of the efforts Torrance has been involved with and how that may relate to the other South Bay cities in trying to combat the problem? Because, of course, we realize there are those that love the wildlife, but there's a lot of families that are concerned for their children and their pets, and we've seen the consequences.
Yes, we have.
Should be. Just talk, he'll kick it up.
This talk.
Got it up? It should. There you go.
Okay, there we go. We've been analyzing and structuring a plan for quite a few years now to address what is a general concern within the community of roaming coyotes. We saw instances of them arriving over the last 5-6 years and becoming more of a problem of small pet deaths and people worrying about them when they went on walks and other things. Council just recently took a look at that plan and has done some tweaking to it. Some of those modifications, which involve a trapping to maintain a stable population, not allow it to expand, but to cut back the population, will require a CEQA evaluation and report, and we're in the process of doing that at the present time. I have to tell you, though, if you go back in time, and you look at the study books or the reports from the police department in Torrance, 1926, there's one log entry where the reporting person at the station received a request to deal with a wild dog out in the neighborhood, and the next line says, police officer responded, shot dog, matter dead.
A different time.
And I have my one element of my family that moved to 40 miles north of Dallas in Texas. And it's a rapidly changing area, very similar to Torrance in the South Bay in the 1950s. Residential houses are coming up in 400 and 500 blocks. My great-grandson's neighborhood has coyotes on a regular basis. The county sheriff comes in and uses the spotlights to kind of chase them away before the kids leave for school. So it is a nationwide problem that's being addressed across the line.
That's true. And in fact, even in my city, which I would never imagine they returned, there'd been sightings in a couple of the parks and one school. So they're across the South Bay. Now, another issue that's also been in the news for Torrance, and I was joking with your mayor, Pat Fury, earlier about what tough questions should I ask Leroy here, but the refinery's been a thing that's been in the news a lot, and it's particularly interesting to me because I was telling you earlier that my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, worked there when it opened back in 1930. It was General Petroleum at that time, later to be Mobil, and then of course later Exxon, and now the new company. But again, it's the same sort of concerns. You have two sides to the issue. The neighborhood is concerned with pollution, explosions, which I recall in the 60s. I knew an individual who was killed in one of those. So they're concerned on that side, but then you have the issue of the employment. You don't want to lose jobs. Utility users tax, which is one of the things you and I first talked about years ago. So how is Torrance coming to grips with all those issues as you see the future for the refinery as well?
I don't know if we know the future as far as it goes. Air quality is currently discussing the yeas and nays of the processes that are used at the refinery. I show our employees when they start with the city, just to remind them, the refinery sits in the middle of wild fields, farms, and areas in 1951. So when it was built in 28, it was in the middle of the wilderness. There was nothing around it. The urban area has pressed into the refinery. The refinery, oftentimes people ask our council and others, how do we allow the refinery to be built in the middle of the city? And it's just the reverse. It is something that's processing. It's a major employer, major producer of oil and products for the South land. An awful lot of our airplanes fly on fuels from El Segundo and Torrance in the South Bay. It's part of our lifestyle at this time. It's hard to say what the future will hold and what transitions will take place both at the refinery and in the processes that they use. But the council continues to monitor, continues to work with the refinery to see that they maintain a very safe campus and that they use the most viable products that are available at the time.
Yeah, and I would have to say, just as an outside observer, you don't see the incidences that used to happen. There was explosions almost on an annual basis there, and fires and so forth that were much more extensive and widespread than what we've seen in recent years. Just on another note, you mentioned aviation fuel that's produced here, and I told you that I have this regional transportation plan. Before it was a refinery, the plan was it was going to be a regional airfield.
Oh, I
So
missed
it
that.
would have been an airport.
My history.
Prior to the Lomita flight strip.
He has a book out on lost airfields, and I have one, or a discussion of alternative histories in the South Bay. One of the stirring ones is there was an airport just up by the 405 off Prairie. What if it had grown into the major
That's
airport?
right. That was the one that was the original Torrance Airport. It was called the North Torrance Airport, while the Torrance Airport was still called the Lomita Flight Strip. So, anyway, moving on. Jan, I've known you for many years, and of course, I've always been impressed because you're a true historian in the sense that you do your own research, and you've authored so many books on one specific topic, Manhattan Beach. But in your involvement with not only your writing and so forth, you've been community-minded, you've tried to do a lot of historic preservation, which of course in Southern California, that's something that's not widespread as it is in other parts of the country. And one issue that you fought, I know, for in your city was the adoption of the Mills Act. And for those that don't know what the Mills Act is, it's a tax incentive that allows property owners savings if they keep, let's say, a historic home in some sort of original state, and they get a big tax savings in doing so. It's an optional thing. My city adopted it probably more than 5 years ago. But you were very involved with that. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of your efforts with historic preservation?
Is this on? I guess
Should
it
be.
is. Yes, well, thank you very much, and thank you for your organization to invite me here. It's great fun. Some feel that I do not get out of Manhattan Beach, but I do on occasion. The Mills Act and the Conservancy, we put an ordinance together 13 years ago. Manhattan Beach has been very lax in protecting its historical buildings and its historical landmarks. So I took it upon myself with a wonderful group of people to try to save some of the homes. And so far, we have had 2 homes that have been registered in Sacramento as historical landmarks, but they are not under the guidance of the Mills Act. The Mills Act has been fought in the city right down to the present day. We do not have one house. Now, I really commend Hermosa, Manhattan, Hermosa and Redondo for their activity. They've done wonders in saving some of their historical landmarks. But I'm not going to give up. I'm still working at it. In fact, on the 19th, we have one home on Highland Avenue that they're trying very hard to get involved with the Mills Act, which is a savings, as Jim said. It's a savings on your tax. However, you do sign a contract with the state for 10 years, which just automatically keeps revolving. But you can do, many people feel you cannot do any upgrading, which is not true. You can work on the inside of the home for as long and as much as you want. It's the outside that they are interested in saving. The color of the paint, the type of wood, the stonework. If it was original, they want you to remain there, remain that feeling, that ambiance of a historical landmark. We have some fine architecture. One of my books, which for those who picked one up out in the other room, I have given some books away on books that I have written, subjects I've written about. And you will see that the diversity in Manhattan Beach is extensive. However, many feel that there is no architecture in Manhattan Beach. But if any of you are familiar with Manhattan, the beach cottages, which are being torn down rapidly. But the Mills Act, we're still going to work for it. We do have a couple of our council people who are very much in alliance with it. One of them, David Lesser, who is a council person here in Manhattan, is very, very supportive of the history and the whole conservative movement in Manhattan. So, is that?
All right, David's out
Phil?
there. I saw him earlier. He's got some kudos. Thank you, Jan.
You're welcome.
Monique, an issue that I've always been intrigued by in your region of the Palos Verdes Peninsula is the fact that unlike so much of the, let's say, the interior of the South Bay, all the land has been developed. But the peninsula has been unique in the fact that they've been able to preserve, in some areas, quite a bit of rural lifestyle, specifically Rolling Hills and parts of Rolling Hills Estates and the other 2 cities as well. What do you see as challenges going forward to try and keep that sort of environment there in that part of the community? Is that something that your library ever becomes involved with in discussions with the city governments?
We certainly do have discussions like that with the city and also with our residents. I think that the items that you're pointing out, both the preservation, open space, are issues that have really defined the 4 cities of the Palos Verdes Peninsula and actually the 25 square miles of the area. Preservation and maintaining architecture, specifically for the city of Palos Verdes Estates through the Homes Association. It's been what defines, I think, the development of the cities. It was because of that and local control and making sure that we have open space and the cities organized themselves in order to preserve that. It's really, I think, the defining characteristics of that 25 square miles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now,
yeah.
of course, Leroy's a little concerned because you're providing the habitat to grow the
Yes,
coyotes.
that's exactly right. We are
which coming
providing the
down.
habitat for the coyotes.
Yeah, so that's a challenge you're dealing with.
It is
However-
a challenge. We'll have to work a little bit better to do that.
However, I do recall one elected on the Hill who will
Yes.
remain nameless said, "Oh, we just shoot them." So,
No. But I think that it really is an important issue, and I think the challenges going forward are what type of legislation is coming down from the state, and how do we preserve what the homes and the areas have, like the granny flats, or, as they're called, or the accessory dwelling units.
Talk more about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, and then even how do we maintain, with changes. The City of Palos Verdes Estates has also, and the Homes Association has also taken an interest in preservation. So the Merlot Gate Lodge has just recently been designated by the state and has gone now to federal registration. So I think that is of interest, and maintaining, again, local control as much as we can, like the cell towers and whatnot, and how do we preserve the environment that we have on the peninsula.
Speaking of the Merlot, some of you may have seen it in the news. The Merlot Gatehouse had an article featured in the paper. It's right on Via Velmonte. So when I was working for Torrance, I was up and down that road all the time, and I got to know the fellow that was there, living there years ago. It was leased. He wasn't the owner. Beautiful little structure. If you're going up Hawthorne Boulevard where the hill is, Butcher Hill, turn off on Via Velmonte and just go around the loop, and there it is. And the greatest feature, I thought, was the little mailbox in front of the home is a miniature of the house.
That's correct. Yes.
Just fascinating. Yeah. Tony, something that goes hand in hand with all aspects of South Bay history is aviation, of course. And as Mr. Williams, we'll get to in just a minute, well knows, the first air meet in the United States was here in the South Bay, in Carson, credit to Carson, thereabouts, and the Dominguez air meet, of course. But everything involving Hughes, Northrop, Lockheed, it's all here. And of course, we saw those challenges that were faced at the end of the Cold War, where aerospace sort of took a big hit. Back in those days, I was interviewing so many individuals when working for Torrance. They wanted to work for a city because they were out of work for a long time. How do you see things going forward? I mean, we also had in the news, of course, we have SpaceX in Hawthorne, which is a shining star, but even they announced some pending layoffs coming here. What do you see as the challenges for the South Bay region for everything involving employment, all aspects of aviation?
Well, there are a lot of challenges, obviously. I personally don't see the manufacturing base that used to be here. I think that's pretty much gone. But I think aerospace will retain a very strong footprint because there's a lot of talent here. The people like to live in this area. And space is not necessarily as manufacturing intensive as aircraft, although in terms of military aircraft, the production rates are so much lower than, for say, what they have up in Seattle with the Boeing jetliners, where they're rolling them out, several hundred a year. You're not seeing those kind of production rates for military aircraft. So in that respect, I don't think the manufacturing is going to come back in the way that it was in the 50s and the 60s. But I do think that aerospace will be here for a while, especially with the advent of privatized space through SpaceX. You see a lot of privatized space up in Mojave. So I think that will have a strong footprint in this region as well. And of course, Elon Musk is doing all sorts of other things besides aerospace.
Very true.
So, we may have tunnels all the way to Mojave before we know it.
Through the COG, we did a recent tour of the tunnel over there on Crenshaw, and you're right.
I do want to interject one thing that was brought up earlier about the refineries, when people saying, why did you allow a refinery to be built in the middle of a city? I think the same could be said for the airports. When they were originally built, they were out in the middle of nowhere or in very sparsely housed areas. Well, with the increasing population, that's sort of encroached on the airport, so then you start having the noise and flyover issues and the risk of accidents and whatnot. And I think there's a twofold problem with that, is that one, air traffic has gotten heavier, and it's also gotten, for at least a point, noisier, which caused a lot of the complaints. The stage 3 sound restrictions that the country put into effect have lessened that somewhat. But the fact is LA is a major point of entry, a major point of people going overseas. You're going to have a lot of air traffic coming out of LAX, and it's also going to have a lot of residual traffic with the small airports in the area too.
That's very true, and hits home because as electeds and others who are staff for the cities, there's been numerous tours of LAX that many of my colleagues here have attended, and you see what's coming out there. Just a couple of quick plugs, though, to tie into what you just said, mentioning some of the old airfields. There is a website called Little Known and Abandoned Airfields. If you go to that website, it features across the country all these lost airports, if you will, including many here in the South Bay are featured. The one Leroy just spoke about is on there as well.
It's a great site. I've been
Yeah.
on that website, and there's a lot of fun things on it. So
Yeah, Paul Freeman's done a good job on that thing. One other plug is, speaking of aviation in the South Bay, those who haven't already visited, you have two great museums, the Flight Path and Western Museum of Flight, which is in Leroy City, right at Torrance Airport. So go out and see those if you haven't already. And now, speaking of historic preservation, Mr. Williams.
Yes, sir.
Your archive, to me, been a gold mine. If you haven't visited this facility, that's another thing to put on your checklist. I do recall back in the old days, probably 15 years ago, the first time I went down there, the archive was nothing more than just a basement. It was down in a little hidden cave, essentially. But the wealth of information, photographs, documents, books, et cetera, that are preserved at the university is just gold. And I don't know how many years ago did they build the new library?
9.
Not already, gosh. It's like a palace. He's got the highest office on campus. So he went from the pits to the tower. But I want to spotlight, by the way, the images you're seeing behind us can be found on the digital archive link for the university. This is a bunch of my family's old pictures and postcards that his university's been actively scanning and preserving, countless. So if you go to their website, you'll see all across the South Bay and elsewhere. But Greg, specifically the point of historic preservation, Jan was touching on some of that. Yours is not so much buildings, but you're preserving documents, photographs, anything relative to the cities of the South Bay and its history. Would you talk a little about what the university's done?
Sure, thank you. Yes, we've been out of the cave in the archives for about 9 years. We're in a beautiful new building on Cal State Dominguez Hills campus. We are really in the business of collecting the history of the South Bay, of Los Angeles, of other areas. We have Jim's collection. We have 50,000 items online that people can use, including a number of South Bay materials. In fact, the South Bay is so intricately connected to Dominguez Hills because the campus was founded in 1960, the legislation, and then we were told it was going to be called South Bay State. And after South Bay State, it became Cal State Palos Verdes. And after that, they set up their first campus in a bank building in Rolling Hills. And after that, it came down to 3 sites, one in Carson, one maybe in Fox Hills, and somewhere in Torrance. And everybody was fighting back and forth, and Vincent Thomas was all over the place saying, you can't put it here, you can't put it there. After the Watts Rebellion happened, there was a push towards getting the campus in Carson, and that's eventually what happened, although the plans were essentially almost ready to go anyways before the rebellion. And so what we collect on South Bay history ranges anywhere from Japanese American incarceration to the Dominguez family and the Delamo family. And do you know that Mr. Delamo came from Spain to South America, then up to LA to find a wife, and he found a Miss Dominguez, and 100 years later there's a mall.
Exactly.
Yes. And he made out quite well. So what we have done, we've actually created history that is both accessible to the public on our websites, and it's growing. We collect material all the time. We have the papers of Juanita Millender McDonald, you're in the building named after her. We have the papers of Glenn Anderson, who the 105 freeway is named after, and he got money for every other freeway in in creation. Yes. And so basically, I'd invite everybody here to consider, if they have history materials, to give us a call, and we'll tell you whether we could make them accessible. We generally get larger collections than all the local historical societies, so we're not really, maybe we're competing with Monique, and we're very interested in Jan's papers, and Jim's papers are all over the archive. So what that makes is we're personally involved in collecting South Bay history, and so that's all I have at this point.
Thank you for putting the ad in there. Yes, if you have old photos of the region, put them there. They're safe.
Jim, may I say
Yeah,
something?
sure, Jan.
Yeah, I'd like to comment.
You're good.
I'd like to comment on the college. I have been invited for all my research, which takes out one full room of my home, which Mr. Williams has come over and seen, gracefully invited me to join. And I look forward to it. The only thing, I haven't released the thousands of photos I have and the millions of words that I've published, 8 books so far on the history of Manhattan. But the thing that impressed me the most about the school and the library is you have to go over just to wander through it, even if you're not doing research. It's like a museum. I was so impressed with the paintings, the sculpture, the way it's laid out, and the friendliness. I've met people over there from Pasadena and San Diego, and so it's really well worth seeing, and I thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you.
Very true, very true. And it's all climate controlled and protected and so forth. One other anecdote, Greg mentioned the Delamos of the mall and all the history involved with that, but the Delamos are actually buried here in the South Bay as well at the Dominguez Seminary at the Adobe, so if you're ever out, another place to visit. Now what I'd like to do is talk on some regional topics and open up to any of the panel that wants to chime in on it. There's several issues. I mean, it's countless, but we'll focus on just a few here, the time remaining. I think one that we can all appreciate, if you're all a resident of the South Bay, probably the number one gripe you have is just how concentrated we are here. It is just so packed, and it affects everything from your travel times. The congestion just grows and grows and grows, correct? So looking back, we could see a time when it was this almost egalitarian farm life, rural, which frankly I wished I lived back then. But what does any of the panelists see going forward? I mean, we've seen efforts made at transportation to alleviate the problem, but then on the other hand, and the other topic I wanted to talk on was housing, where the state is trying to force the cities to increase the concentration. So what would you like to offer? Leroy, you want to go first on that? Because you're probably delved into it already.
I think we're into a serious time of engaging. Oh, that'll do it. Serious time of really dancing with the legislature over who's going to make those decisions. The state's moving in very aggressively and the governor to take away the rights of local agencies to make the decisions as to where and what and the scope of housing to come. It isn't saying that housing needs might not be there and that cities should address them, but I think that this struggle over local control will be a major issue over the next several years. And cities really have to step out and speak to the state as to the needs of our local communities to make their decisions local.
Hear, hear. I agree. And we've seen, for example, on the news, Huntington Beach being actually sued by the state over this very issue. So we may see this coming forward to some of our own cities. Now, that may affect the peninsula more than some of the others because you do have regions of open space. You could argue that the rest of the cities are built out. There's not a lot of vacant land. I mean, they're trying to get us to reform some of the lands or reuse and so forth. What do you think that's going to do to the Hill, these efforts?
Well, certainly if we can keep local control local, then I think that the lifestyle and what the four cities on the peninsula has strived to do for the last, years since the 1920s that it's been developed, that it'll be as it is. I think that's really the most important part is let's keep it local. We can't build out any more just in terms of space because that has been, because we do have preservation of the Land Conservancy. And with the cities and say with the Homes Association, with Palos Verdes Estates, just making sure that the development stays as it was planned to be from the very beginning. So I absolutely agree, it has to be local.
As we know, it'll probably be a challenge in court at some
Yeah,
point
it's
with the
how.
state because they are usurping the local control of our planning departments and so forth. Something I'll share with the group as well, I serve on SCAG's Energy and Environment Committee and had a report some months ago. An individual was speaking there of a future plan that they have for California where, if you're all familiar with Playa Vista as a development site, the old Hughes airport site, they literally want to push this into the bedroom communities, if you will. So your old housing tracts, let's say built in the 50s, may have a single family home, single story on it. Under some of these new plans, they want to create upwards, maybe 3 stories. Imagine how that's going to affect a little neighborhood that has single family homes. So we got to prepare for that. Anything else the panel would add?
Yeah, just from a personal aspect, I grew up in Redondo Beach, and I can remember we would take a drive down the Esplanade, and they would have the single-story bungalows on one side, and you can see the view of the ocean on the other. And then now you can't. It's Condo Canyon. And I'm seeing that in a lot of the South Bay cities. I live in Burbank now, and let me tell you, the drive down was fun. But that's I think one of the things that's going to have to concern people in the future, and it's going to affect not just local cities, but it's going to affect businesses like Northrop Grumman, who draw their workforce from the local area. People have to get to work, even though they are now migrating more and more towards working from home, which is what I do mostly. I work from home. But that only goes so far. And so there's going to have to be some way of making sure that A, people can afford to live in the area where they can work, and B, that they can get to work in a timely manner. Otherwise, the quality of life will affect everything around it.
Well, you're touching on the next thing I was going to, and that's transportation, which we've all seen the recent efforts, Metro, and it's still an ongoing process, of course, but it's another one of these cases where I think we've gone full circle. Those of you who know any knowledge of South Bay region probably remember the stories of the red car and Pacific Electric, which originally was a green car, if you delve into it. There was 3 lines throughout the South Bay. There was the beach route, which Jan knows all too well and is featured in her books, right along the coast all the way to Redondo. There was another one who came a little further east through Gardena, and then one through Inglewood, Hawthorne, Lawndale, and then cut over, tied into Redondo, right through Torrance. And so now we're looking to bring it all back, which once was here. But we had recent tax measures. We were conjoined, but for different reasons on our opposition to that, but that's another topic. What does the panel see going forward with all these issues with light rail and other ideas that are ongoing, getting to the airport? These are all issues the COG's very much involved with. What do you see the future holding for any of that?
Torrance is in the midst of building a transit facility in our community, which is both aimed at the transit lines and hopefully the extension of the Green Line. I'd take a moment to mention that the South Bay is kind of the afterthought of the County of Los Angeles. In the 1950s and 60s, Torrance was continually flooded because we were the last of the areas to get storm drains. We lucked out, perhaps, because we didn't get the Torrance Freeway, but we were the last of the areas to be explored for freeway elaborations. Actually got the last freeway in here. And you feel almost the same way now in the operation of light rail. The rest of the county has got projects everywhere. And Metro brags about how much they're spending elsewhere, and they're rather painfully aware that they have to spend some money for the South Bay. And somewhere the South Bay has to speak up and get their act, get the identification that this is such an important region and should have some of these assets to achieve transportation needs.
You know, speaking on behalf of my city and Redondo, our greatest concern is the neighborhoods being impacted, the residents. If you live by the light rail, you're going to hear it. You're going to feel it no matter what the mitigation efforts do, but we hope for maximum mitigation to address that. Even undergrounding's been discussed, but you were about to say something?
Oh, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing this one. I think what happened in Manhattan, as you mentioned, we had two lines. They were basically work lines. They weren't for commuters or whatever, although the red car brought them into LA. But what we have found over the years, just after World War II, was the fact that the Santa Fe line that went down from Inglewood down to Redondo, down to the harbor, there were people who wanted that to be renovated and to move. And what we found in Manhattan was the fact that the neighbors said, no, forget it. And if you want to get elected in this town, then you stay away from that railroad line. And they did. It's now a jogging path. So, you know,
The old Santa Fe is converted.
I think what happens.
It's the green belt through the beach cities.
Green belt, right. And I think what happens is that people have much more power than they realize they have at the ballot box and getting out there and going to your council meetings and keep pounding on them. And eventually, you know, they listen. So I think people, if there's something you want or don't want, you want to get out there and start pounding that table because it's the only way it's going to get done.
You're here. Yeah, Monique?
Absolutely, I totally concur with that. One of the things that I've seen, and just kind of in the research that I've done on the Palos Verdes Peninsula, is at the original development, there was supposed to be more mass transportation on the peninsula. The red car was going to come through there. There was talks in the early 1920s and the early 19-teens where we would have the Pacific Electric red car or the Pacific Electric coming along the peninsula so that we would be connected, going from Redondo Beach along the skirts of the Palos Verdes Peninsula over to the harbor, and then again towards Torrance. And that didn't happen. And I think that, since the area has started being developed, we still lack public transportation in the area. Yes, we've got buses, but I mean, at least there's a little bit more transportation. And being a resident of the city of Palos Verdes Estates, I know there is no bus service on the weekends. You have to have car transportation. So a mass transportation and doing something on the peninsula, I think, is something that we would all love to be able to see. And thanks to Jackie Bacharach, who has worked tirelessly on transportation issues on the peninsula, I think it'd be nice to have some more of that. And I see that as an issue.
I agree. Another little plug for the library. Years ago, I was doing research on a little-known transportation project that was back in the 20s. It was called the Hollywood Palos Verdes Parkway, which would have been the first freeway system predating the Arroyo Seco, which was in the 40s. This was back in the 20s. It was going to essentially run the route of Crenshaw. So Crenshaw would have evolved into a freeway at some point in time. However, there was a lot of opposition because of the tax increments under something called the Mattoon Act. You can Google that and look it up. But so much of the materials is housed. Your predecessor we delved through all these records and everything. Anyway, we're nearing the end, so I wanted to open it up to the panelists. Any other, let's say, prognostications for the future? Because that's sort of the theme of going forward from where we've been. Anything you want to chime in on?
There is and I don't know if people are aware of it, and this has been one of the utopian dreams of futurists since about the 1930s, where you have your own personal air transportation.
George Jetson?
George Jetson, yeah. But it started way back in the 1930s, even a little bit earlier. What we're seeing now is a tremendous effort by people like Uber, people like Elon Musk, to do electric-powered personal flight transportation. Now, personally, I don't think they're there yet. They're a long way from there yet because some of it's going to be autonomous. And you're going to have all the issues of it's crowded airspace in this city already. So how is this going to work? But just as addressing the transportation aspect of it, there is that movement that's going on. And there are several companies out there that are working on private, convertible automobiles, aircraft, et cetera.
Your own personal drone.
Yes. That'll take you where you want to go, hopefully safely.
Safely, that's the key. Anything else before we wrap?
Speaking of alternative histories, which you brought up earlier, there's this amazing file in our architectural drawings collection, and it had potential buildings in South Bay, especially where Dominguez Hills is located. And the one from 1958 is a potential site for Dodger Stadium. And then in 1962, there was, 1960, there's a potential site for the Angels Stadium. And then there was another potential site for a 1963 or 2 World's Fair. So that didn't happen, so there's less traffic now.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of hidden stuff out there once you start to peel back the layers. A lot of unknown stories, but that's part of the effort of what the archive has done and Jan's efforts writing and so forth. Anyway, we've come to the final minute here. I want to thank the panel so much for volunteering their time and coming down. I got asked to do it too, kind of on a kind of a whim, but it's been fun. And sorry, you have time? Oh, you gave me the hook. I'm just told we do have time for a couple of questions, and I see a hand back there. Can a mic go to that table? Yeah. Maybe yell loud.
Just Google CSUDH.
Use the mic.
Google CSUDH Digital Archives for our website, or the Girth Archives.
When I forget it, I write Dominguez Digital, and it goes right to it on a Google search. There's a gentleman at the microphone.
Good morning, panel.
I think it's on. Is the switch on?
The switch is on.
Hear
Beautiful.
you now.
Good morning, panel. Larry Mazelish from the city of Rancho Palos Verdes. Thank you so much for sharing your views and thoughts. The regional history is very important, especially when used as a learning tool for the future. What mistakes are notable that have been made in the past so we know not to repeat those in the future?
Anybody? I got my opinions, but go for it.
I think one of them was really moving out early on undergrounding utilities.
Did you hear it? He said undergrounding utilities. We should have struck sooner than after the fact. The after the fact is a huge political problem. I deal with it all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm curious to know how the peacocks ended up in PV in the South Bay. And if there's any...
Monique, you want to try that?
I think that
They flew there.
There are a couple of different explanations, I think, for the peacocks getting to Palos Verdes. Frank Vanderlip Sr. was a great bird lover. He had an aviary on his property in what is now Rancho Palos Verdes over in the Portuguese Bend area. It is said that Lucky Baldwin, who also maintained some peacocks on Catalina Island, gave him some peacocks. I don't think we know really what it is about the peacocks and how they got there. But on our digital website, actually, in addition to Greg, the library also maintains a local history center, and we have a digital archives at palosverdeshistory.org. And I actually have Frank Vanderlip's aviary photographs on the website. You can take a look. He has a lovely white pair of white peacocks there as well, so you can take a look at those.
Any plans to control the population?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I can kind of answer that. It was about the population.
Population?
I served on a panel for Palos Verdes Estates years ago, and I was quite surprised to learn they have a dedicated staff person, full-time employee, and that's the total of his job, is to deal with peacocks.
But they're also all over the peninsula, so each of the cities, I think, also can control them. Very interestingly, about the history of the peacocks, there was a time in the 1970s when the population was so large of the peacocks that the city of Palos Verdes Estates, I am told, started a program to ship the peacocks off to people who wanted them. So you could actually sign up and have a peacock sent to you. What's that? Yes.
Hi there. Amy Josephek from Hollywood Riviera.
Oh,
Hi there.
I'm sorry.
So thank you for the historical context, especially with the old gorgeous photos being shown over your head while we were watching, and also for the question about learning from mistakes. And to that point, the comment about why did you allow refineries or airports to be built in the middle of the city, we understand that like the coyotes, they were here first. But just like you realizing that we must deal with things like the coyotes, we also must deal with the realities of the airport with its increased noise and traffic, and the refinery. While we know it's not going to be disappeared, MHF should not be allowed to be part of it, to have a toxic chemical. There are other ways to have the refinery that will be safer, and so we should learn from our mistakes and make changes that are appropriate. Thank you.
Anything you want to add? No? You already covered it. We have time for 2 more questions. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
maybe we should talk to the coyotes about the peacocks, but...
There you go.
But I also wanted to follow, while the refineries were there before the people came, hydrofluoric acid, which came in much more recently, and there is an alternative, and a number of the cities have taken stands calling it to be phased out, and the AQMD is considering a rule to phase it out, and I would encourage all the other cities that haven't yet weighed in to call for a ban and a phase out in 4 years to do so, because it is possible, and it will actually preserve the refinery in the sense that it will be more modern and more competitive, because there are only 2 refineries in California that use this extremely deadly chemical that, if released, could cause mass casualties and destroy the economy of the South Bay.
Okay, thank you. Time for one more question. We got to wrap.
Hi, Kathy Benz from Torrance. We moved in, my parents and I and my brother, moved into Hawthorne in 1935 when Hawthorne was 1 mile wide and 2 miles long. And there was just one other house on the street with us, and we could walk all the way over to the Broadway Circle through without houses in our way. We raised goats and chickens at the time, and I was raised on goat's milk. When my mother died in 1996, and eventually the house was sold, the new people who moved in, they didn't really remodel the inside, they just worked on the inside. So my brother has visited, it's still pretty much the same. The house was 75-year-old at the time, so I don't know what, it's probably 125, 130 years old, I don't know by now. But I have acquired Mom's photo albums, and if there's anything in there that you could use.
Absolutely.
Sure, definitely.
Speak with Greg.
The house is still there.
Okay.
My brother has visited since they remodeled inside. The outside is the same, and he says the inside is literally the same. They just, cleaned up the walls and the ceilings and all that kind of stuff, and just repainted and whatever. But yeah.
I think that's great. Just see Greg right after the talk, because we need to wrap because we have another presentation coming up.
Okay, and as for the coyotes that you're talking about, over at El Camino College, we have coyote deterrents that when you walk on campus, I have pictures in my camera here if you want to see, that are solar, they work by solar, and at nighttime a red blinking light comes on. And since they've had those posted on campus, the coyotes don't seem to be there anymore, so you might want to look into something like that.
Well, thank you for that information. And again, thanks to the panel. Great job. Enjoyed it. Let's have a big hand for them.
Thank you all very much. And we have gifts. We come bearing gifts for you. And if we'll come over here, we'll do a photo op together. Let's hear a round of applause again for our wonderful panel.